Thanks for coming to our session. My name is Steve Kaplan. I'm Vice President of Data Center Virtualization for INX. And over there's Kevin Carr, Director of Information Technology for Denton County, Texas. And Tony Coaxum, System Manager for Denton County, Texas. This session is being recorded, so I've been asked you to please turn off your cell phones. And during the Q&A period, if you would kindly use the microphone, or I can just repeat your question. So for those of you who have read my blogs or possibly my books, you know that I advocate a very strategic approach to virtualizing the data center as opposed to a kind of a tactical, laissez-faire, slow approach as you go along. And I admire both Tony and Kevin because as a Microsoft shop at Denton County, they started out with just a few HyperV VMs to try it out. But before they knew it, it had grown to 24 VMs. And then they took a step back and took a very strategic approach to virtualizing their data center with VMware vSphere. So they'll tell you about their experiences. As an incentive to get you to ask questions after the presentation, I do have about 10 copies of my book, Foundation for Cloud Computing with VMware vSphere 4. And I'm going to give about 10 of these copies away to the first 10 people that ask questions. I co-authored this with Duncan Epping, who's VCDX number 7 for VMware. He's out of Denmark. And with John Aristid, who's VCDX number 1, also for VMware. And all three of us will be at the VMware, the main, the store, the booth at VMworld over on the, is it Moscone Center South?
Right.
At 3 o'clock. So we will be doing a book signing, though I have to warn you that unlike John or Duncan, my signature actually reduces the value of the book by about half if you go to resell it on eBay. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Kevin.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate you coming here instead of eating lunch. Food is totally overrated, except for maybe one gentleman in the front here who's got the idea, eat and watch. Yeah. Thank you again for coming. I'm Kevin Carr. I'm the Director of Technology Services for Denton County, and Tony Coaxum is our Systems Manager for Denton County. Denton County is located just north of Dallas-Fort Worth in Texas. We're one of the top 10 largest counties by population in Texas, and we're one of the fastest growing counties in the nation for about 10 years now. Our office in IT, we provide centralized IT support for about 1,600 county employees, and we have networking services in more than 50 county facilities. Last year, we had about 150 physical servers in our environment, and we have an EMC SAN. In order to keep up for the demand in services, and to try to keep taxes down, we're constantly adding new servers, and we are completely out of data center space. I think a lot of you might have that same issue. We're out of floor space, we're out of power, our cooling systems couldn't handle it. We were just completely maxed out. We also had a lot of the same issues having 150 servers spread out in a data center. We had cabling issues, and a lot of issues like that, management issues. We were replacing servers approximately every 4 years and going through the process of commissioning new servers, decommissioning the old ones. It was very time-consuming. So we started looking at virtualization more out of necessity than really a desire to move in that direction. We needed to find a way to add new servers, even though we didn't have any space for them whatsoever. But as we started looking at it, some of the other appeals that we had were our power savings, also high availability, things that we didn't have in our environment currently. So we started looking at HyperV. We already had Microsoft Windows Server, so it was kind of a logical first step for us. We installed HyperV R1. About a year ago, we had 24 VMs running on that. And it worked fairly well for us. Throughout the year, we had more and more VMs pop up as we had new services that we needed to deploy. And quickly we started realizing that it was a little bit too difficult for us to manage, especially as we anticipated eventually virtualizing all of our servers. So it scared us a little bit. So we went on the lookout for Microsoft partners to help us. We asked the Microsoft partners that we worked with, and they kept telling us, just wait for the R2 version to come out. Some of the functionality you want will be out here soon. Just wait. And also, none of them had any extensive experience installing Hyper-V in large environments. I think every one of them that we talked to had some experience. They were running in their office for a small number of VMs, but nobody who did it at a large enterprise level like we were wanting to do. So we'd worked with INX for many years. They were a great partner for us. They provided a lot of support for us on our Cisco voice and data network. Cisco, yeah, I see someone from Cisco here. So we asked them for their help on coming up with a strategy, and they recommended VMware. So being that we had a lot of faith in them, we decided to take a look at it. And the functionality that was real appealing to us was like the Cisco Nexus 1000V switch. It was a great way to take care of our networking problems that we were having with Hyper-V. Also, the power management feature was very appealing to us. As a county agency, a majority of our a majority of our servers are only used about a third of the work week, or a third of the calendar week. Most of our offices were about 8 to 5. We have a sheriff's office and juvenile detention that's open 24/7, and those still needed services. But majority of the rest of the county, come 5 o'clock, they were home, and very few of them used a lot of services after hours. So the ability to be able to shut down the servers after hours was very appealing to us. Tony's going to talk a little bit about the Site Recovery Manager and how we're using it. But another issue that we had with Hyper-V that made us look at VMware was just the support of all of our software manufacturers. I don't think we had a single software product installed that claimed to support Hyper-V. Now, not all of them claimed to support VMware, but many of them supported VMware, where none of them supported Hyper-V. So INX used their what do they call it? Their standard delivery framework to push out our project. We probably not the best recommendation in the world, but we rushed our begin planning session just because we were at the end of our fiscal year. We had money that we had not spent from the purchase of physical servers. I'm not going to buy physical servers if I don't have any data center space to put it in. So we decided to make the purchase rather quickly. We came up with an ROI. Our estimate is that we're going to save approximately $2 million over 5 years. That's fairly conservative. And we're about 1 year into it, and it's looking very, very good. So instead of purchasing all of our physical servers at the end of our fiscal year, we decided to purchase VMware. We purchased VMware licenses. I did have to purchase some additional SAN storage space, and we purchased 9 host servers. I will say we, thinking about purchasing those 9 host servers, that wasn't at the recommendation of INX or anyone else. In fact, when I told the installer who was installing our vSphere environment, they laughed. I wouldn't say he laughed. He smiled very big when I told him we purchased 9 servers. But frankly, I knew more than he did, and I knew that we couldn't run that many servers on that many VMs on just a small number of servers, and we wouldn't get the performance that they were promising. So I bought more servers. Well, needless to say, 5 or 6 of them are just sitting there in sleep mode right now. So I'm trying to come up with new ideas to install more services that use more of our server capability. So, that being said, we are running on about 3 or 4 hosts right now. Performance is better than it was on the physical servers, and I still do not understand that at all. I don't understand how we can run that many servers on 3 or 4 hosts and it works so great. But I have Tony here, and he does understand. So he's going to talk a little bit more about some of the benefits that we realized, and our actual implementation of vSphere and what our future plans are. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to talk about some of the other benefits that we realized using vSphere. One of the main ones was high availability, and what this does is the HA recognizes if you lose a host, and it will actually restart all the VMs that were on the downed host on a new host. So you have very limited downtime. Very vastly improved disaster recovery for VMware in the last couple of years, and we are looking into the Site Recovery Manager, and I'll actually go into that a little more later, but that is highly improved disaster recovery. We also have a faster network. Obviously, the more servers you have, the less network capacity you have. So now we have a 10 gig network, which is very reliable and a lot better performance for all of our VMs. Staff requirements, obviously, when you cut your physical servers down, you're going to have a lot less physical touching of servers. And you also have a central management structure, which you can spend a lot less time managing your whole environment. So we went from over 100 servers down to 9 hosts. Our CO2 emissions were drastically reduced. We went from no clustering to having HA. Our network, like I said, is very reliable and a lot faster. And one of another things that we really like is the backups. You can back up the VMs and you can back up at file level. We have 9 hosts that are identical to each other, and each one is hooked up to shared storage. We have our VMs, 4 links for the VMs go directly to our core switch. Our management links that are trunk links go through our physical switches to separate it from the rest of the core. And that's basically all we had to do to set our environment up. Like Kevin talked about a little bit, we went with the Nexus because we already use Cisco's, and that made our network team more comfortable with going into VMware because they already have the interface, and they know how to interface with Cisco's. And the learning curve was actually almost nil because they use Cisco switches already. We have some upcoming initiatives. One of them is desktop virtualization. We have some needs that we're trying to address, and VDI has gotten really popular and really stable lately. So we're looking into like people from state needing access to our network, and just people that are not in the county needing access to our network. So I've set up a demo using VMview and Pano devices to see if that can fit our needs, and we're going to go forward with that and try to implement that. Disaster recovery, like I talked about, Site Recovery Manager, we're looking into using. We have a new building that we should have done in 2012, and we're going to make that our primary site, and our current building our DR site. Disaster recovery is very important to us. As you can tell here, the research that's been done, the majority of businesses that suffer a catastrophe as a result are out of business within 2 years. And 93% of businesses that lose their data center for 10 days go bankrupt within a year. So obviously this is highly important. The way Site Recovery Manager works, it basically protects, the disaster recovery site protects the production site, mainly through partner replication through the storage. It replicates everything through storage. And to set up a disaster site is very minimal configuration, very minimal costs. You have to have a virtual center running at your DR site. You have to have Site Recovery Manager running. Then you just have to decide how much hardware you need for the capacity to do your site recovery. And then, of course, your storage. Storage is always the most important thing because that's where the data replication is taking place. Another major concern that you have to look at if you look in the Site Recovery Manager is whether your applications are active-passive compatible. But that is VMware's solution right now that we are looking into, and it's very solid. And then I will go ahead and pass it over to Steve.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So how many of you work for the public sector? Let's see. And then different question, how many of you are virtualized, say, 90% or more? Wow, that's quite a bit. How many less than 50%? Yeah, that's impressive. I think from what I've seen, the public sector, at least for you guys, are more highly virtualized than the private sector. Most of the organizations I come across are somewhere virtualized between 10 or 50%. Those of you who are less than 50% virtualized, would you like to be, more virtualized? Again, from what I've seen, typically, IT people get it, right? They get the huge benefits that accrue in terms of uptime, in terms of reduced staff time, remote troubleshooting, ease of provisioning hardware, all the things that we all know about virtualization, know and love about it. But it's hard a lot of times to convince the people with money, if there is any money, to spend it on virtualization. Up until about a year ago, when Denton County really started their deployment, it was kind of hard from a technology standpoint too. But then we had what's really the triple storm. VMware vSphere 4 debuted, and that was really the enterprise class virtualization product from VMware, which really made now some of the issues that come up, people complain, well, I can't virtualize my Exchange, or I can't virtualize my mission-critical server or my database server. Well, vSphere 4, probably in this room, nobody has a server so large that it won't run as fast or faster as a virtual machine and vSphere 4, 4.1. So it handled all the performance issues, especially when combined with the Nehalem 5500. vSphere 4 was VMware's most revolutionary product ever. I think it was 3 million engineering hours spent on it over 3 years by over 1,000 engineers. Well, the Nehalem from Intel was their most revolutionary chip since the Pentium Pro 2 debuted, so about the last 18 years. The last big area of kind of the triple storm was the networking capability, and that's really where HyperV and the other competitors, even if other things kind of work, that's where they fall short. The ability to virtualize your network, basically, and give your network guys purview into the virtual machine traffic, helping to eliminate a lot of the problems that come up when the server team asks the network team to configure VLAN for these servers at the end of port so-and-so, and the network team can't even see what's going on, so they get very frustrated, not to mention they get frustrated by the server team configuring their own virtual switches. So it causes a lot of issues. It can cause regulatory problems and not being able to audit traffic in between virtual switches. By going to the virtual switch with VDS with vSphere 4, and then particularly with the Cisco Nexus 1000V and all the tool sets it offers, it eliminates all these issues. And you're able to now apply networking and security policies to your VMs that then follow them around as a vMotion throughout your environment. So it's a really phenomenal solution. Cisco, in their own surveys and studies, have shown that by virtualizing the networking component, you're able to virtualize about 30% typically more of your servers than you would be otherwise. So your tier 1 servers and your regulatory servers, DMZ, et cetera. And because of that 30%, that alone gives you a lot more ROI. It also helps more toward the strategic approach to virtualization. Another barrier that I found a lot of times with organizations is, when they're partially virtualized, they kind of get stuck. And a lot of times what happens is they hit a server in their virtualization journey, and that server they can't virtualize for some reason, and they just stop. Instead of kind of skipping it and going around to other ones, they hit that server and stop, or maybe it's a group of servers and they stop. And like I said, we mentioned the networking can be a big component of that, so getting past the networking hurdle is really big from a technical standpoint. From a cultural, political standpoint, there are still some ISVs out there that don't support their software on VMware. Not a whole lot of them, but there are some smaller ones. And then, of course, there's Oracle. Everybody knows Oracle. A good thing that's happened, though, is that now you can cheat. So you can cheat in a couple ways. For Middlesex County, who spoke on one of our panels yesterday, this happened pre the other way I'm going to tell you about cheating. So what we did, so they had, I guess about 8 servers that were state servers that they couldn't virtualize just because of the state owned them. And so what they did is they set up a plate spin, and we continuously snapped the physical servers to virtual machines. So why would you do that? You're spending more money on servers, but the reason why is now you get all the benefits of the virtual machine, including test dev capabilities, a pseudo type of high availability failover, and most importantly for them, we're able to now continuously replicate those virtual machines over to the DR site, so they're able to meet their disaster recovery. But now we discovered this with NetApp, and now I read a post by EMC that they can offer it too on their Symmetra line. So with NetApp, if you're running VMware vSphere with NFS, you can run, let's say, an Oracle virtual machine, and if you have a problem and you need support, you just take your virtual machine volume and present it as a LUN to a physical server, and you instantaneously go back to physical, get your support from Oracle, and then go back to virtual again. So, completely legal. It works great. So there's really no excuse now not to go 100% virtualization or close to it. Even unified communications, at least with Cisco, Cisco Unified Communications now is supported as a VMware, as a VM on ESX on Cisco UCS, Unified Computing System. So if any of you are running Cisco UC, it's another huge ROI by going to UC as a virtual machine. My Twitter name is ROI Dude, by the way. That's kind of my forte, is working with organizations to understand the financial impacts of virtualizing rather than starting off looking at why should I go NetApp versus EMC, or why should I go HyperV versus vSphere? I say that's not the relevant question. The relevant question is how much are you going to save by virtualizing your organization? How many other benefits are you going to get in environmental, high availability, disaster recovery, reduced staff time, et cetera? Now let's look at the optimal architecture, and then let's look at the products that make up that architecture. Well, here we go. Anybody here doing VDI yet? Well, again, a lot higher than normal. Anybody thinking about VDI? That's great. Well, if you saw from my first slides, my background goes way back in that area. I used to own a company that was named the Citrix Partner of the Year for the United States when I sold it back in 2001. I've co-authored about 7 books on Citrix. And this is before Citrix got into the virtualization space. But the way we used to sell it, what's called XenApp now, MetaFrame, WinFrame, WinView, I started way back in the WinView days. We would sell it kind of the same way. We would sell it as a desktop replacement where people would host their desktops on centralized servers. Of course, a very different technology than virtual machines. We're using the shared Windows kernel under terminal services with Citrix layered on top. So very different technology, very different approach. But the end result, surprisingly similar in the sense that users now see screen prints of their desktops running in a central data center. And I've always believed in this concept. Those of you who support PCs, I always believe that it doesn't matter how much money you have for how sophisticated of a management system, as long as your users can get access to their desktops, you're always going to have problems with support, with management, with security, and of course cost, having to upgrade those PCs every 3, 4, or 5 years, servers in remote offices. It's just a very expensive proposition. And then disaster recovery. An interesting thing happened with the World Trade Center bombing in Manhattan, 9/11. It's very difficult to have effective disaster recovery in a physical world. You saw Denton County with SRM. It's all automated with VMware. But in a physical world, as Tony read off to you, the statistics are not very good. Well, back in Manhattan, the financial institutions had the money. They had the millions of dollars it took to have these physical data center failover plans that actually did work when the World Trade Center bombing came. But what happened is they didn't count on the hundreds of thousands of employees being evacuated from Manhattan for 3 weeks. So these employees were not able to get to their PCs with the client-server software configured, or in many cases their laptops, which were sitting in Manhattan, and so they couldn't access these failed-over data centers. So these multi-million-dollar DR initiatives were rendered ineffective. When you move to a virtual desktop environment, again, this is Middlesex County, New Jersey, who spoke yesterday. That's one of their big drivers. When you go to a virtual desktop environment, your virtual desktops are replicated to your DR site along with all your servers. So in the event of a disaster, your users just need to get to a browser anywhere in the world and log on, and they've got their desktop, their data, their applications. So it's a great solution. The way we look at desktop virtualization is a little differently than a lot of people. Desktops traditionally are definitely a silo within most organizations, a separate desktop group from the server group and the network group and storage group and so on. They may be combined, but a lot of times the desktop group is separate. So people still have this kind of tendency to look at desktops or at VDI as a separate project. But I really encourage organizations to look at virtual desktops as a component of an overall virtualized architecture. I mean, you've already made the investment on the back end in a compute platform, in storage that you can hopefully reuse, in your basic vSphere licensing, your management console. Most importantly, you've made your investment in your IT staff who are trained now and who understand snapshotting VMs and vMotion and HA and all the tools around managing a VMware virtual infrastructure, and they're by far your most expensive resource. So say leverage all the licensing and equipment and skill sets and extend your virtual data center down to the desktop. And that changes, kind of the whole picture of it. It changes the ROI of it, because now you're not looking at a whole new set of cost to move into the desktop. You're layering on top cost of what you've already built in the data center. And it also makes it easier to manage. Now, there are sometimes some large organizations, we see some challenges, the desktop team still wanting to of course, manage their desktops. We see the server team say, oh, no, we want the desktops now. Their VMs running on our servers. I don't know why anybody would want desktops, but you do get some of that. So organization issues need to be worked out as you move through this environment, but economically, it tends to be very compelling. Figure this out yet. So Denton County is somewhat unique in their leadership for grasping this concept of completely virtualized data center a year ago and moving toward it. But they also now are transitioning toward a private cloud. We obviously spoke a lot about that at the keynote today, but a private cloud with monitoring, metering, chargeback, automated DR, automated production environment, workflow, and so on. And during the questions, hopefully Kevin will get a chance to talk a bit more about his ultimate plans to extend the private cloud beyond his own data center and offer it to other agencies and I guess other cities and entities too. So with that, let's open it up for questions, but I do want to make sure Kevin gets the chance to talk about that. And we have books, so any questions out there? Yes, sir. Do you want to come use the mic, or I can repeat it, either way you want. Are you currently running redundant SANs in your environment?
No, not yet. We have redundant paths, but not redundant SANs.
Yeah, we are building out a new data center that we're going to complete in 2012, and as part of that, we are going to have a redundant SAN, and at that time, we're going to implement SRM. So right now, it's really just data center space. We're so maxed out that we just haven't made that move yet. Well, I guess, we didn't actually answer that question. We actually have an older SAN that has a small amount of data or smaller amount of disk storage. So most of our mission critical things are good. It's just our environment as a whole, we do not replicate.
Yes, ma'am.
How are you handling the additional cost of the disk for? You've got a smaller SAN for servers, but what are you doing with the DEI and laptops and all that other fun for users trying to come in remotely? That seems to be a big bottleneck when the cost comes in.
Yeah, for VDI right now, we just implemented a small pilot project for that, and our immediate goal for that was to really solve one issue that we had with non-county employees. We have a lot of state employees and things like that come into our facilities who need or want access to county services. So right now, we're just really targeting just that one aspect right now. We haven't done a complete ROI for VDI countywide for desktops.
As I found out today, I was kind of embarrassed about that.
Yeah.
And how do you catch the Microsoft licensing, which seems to be kicking my butt? Microsoft's licensing for desktop OSs within a virtual environment seems to be a challenge.
Right. Steve, do you want to address that?
Yeah. So they actually, it was a lot worse. That's the good news. It's a lot better than it was. So the way it works today is if you have SA or an enterprise agreement, then you actually don't have to pay anything additional for running a desktop virtual machine if you're running on a laptop or a PC. If you're not running on a laptop PC, or if you don't have an SA or EA, then you have to buy what's called VECD, which is now $100 list per user per year. So the cost of SA is about $50 a user per year. So it's really a delta of $50 list per user per year, which is not insignificant, but I tell organizations, if your desktop virtualization comes down, whether you do it or not, comes down to $50, don't do it. Because it's a big project and takes a big commitment. I mean, I think the results are huge and go way beyond the economic benefits anyway, just security alone. But if that's kind of stopping it, then it's probably better holding off. But typically we find the other benefits that come in terms of hardware refresh and power reduction and staff reduction, if you have that ability, more than compensate for the licensing. Yes, ma'am.
Can you give me some explanation of the cloud, what you're thinking about doing, and size-wise, those kind of things, where you're going with that?
Are you talking about the shared cloud services?
Well, yeah, and you were saying you were going to do a private cloud for your own environment.
Right. We're initially starting off with, we're working towards a private cloud for our own environment. Internally, we're fairly centralized. We do have a sheriff's office that does some of their own IT support. So we do interface with them a little bit. But really our long-term goal is to provide private shared cloud services to other entities. There's a lot of real small cities in our area that they don't have the technology, they don't have the people, and they don't have the money.
So have you started it yet?
No, we have not. We just started implementing in Denton County a year ago, so we're kind of taking care of our business, and it's just we probably won't start that until after we get fully our full disaster recovery implemented with SRM and things like that in 2012.
Yes, sir.
How long did it take from the point where you decided to use vSphere until you were fully implemented, and what kind of challenges did you run into migrating from physics servers to virtualized?
I think it was about 1 week. That's why Tony didn't get much sleep. I'll let Tony answer this question about the technical difficulties.
We implemented in November, and P2Vs we really didn't run into a whole lot except for drivers, basically. That's the only real main thing we had. Some disk drive problems just with space, but that was just because of how it converts over.
Basically, you just went in, took your physical servers, moved VMs.
Right. Just started going. We would show up every night and do about 20 and switch them on.
Let's see. Yes, sir, back there in the blue shirt in the corner.
Do you have any challenges in business to have for stakeholders to really have any physical servers and run them on that servers?
So did you have any challenges convincing staff or stakeholders to take a lot of physical servers and consolidate them on a few number of hosts?
I think we're lucky. A lot of our stakeholders trusted our decision to move forward. Internally, the IT people, including myself, didn't really fully understand and believe and trust in the technology until we really implemented it. But that's why I said in mine, we purchased about twice as many servers that they recommended that we purchase, because I just did not believe we can run. We were targeting several years out, up to 200 servers on a couple hosts. It just does not make sense. But yeah, so we did have some disbelief in our internally in the IT staff. Sir?
Two questions for you. Getting back to when you were looking at Microsoft HyperV, and wasn't going that way, place there, and you were looking at like the System Center Machine Manager, and that just really wasn't cutting it. That tool is going to look VMware offers. Second is just funding sources. I think in the description that there was some mention about information on funding sources for the project. I'm just curious what you related to them.
Right.
So I'll repeat the question. Two questions. One, basically System Center, Virtual Machine Manager. Thanks, I should know that. any thoughts about using that as as part of your Hyper-V deployment? And the second one was funding issues. Where do you get the money?
Right. We did use System Center VMM. I'm not very familiar with it. I don't know if, Tony, if you can speak at all about that.
Yeah, we use it now for other things, but I don't think we really looked into that, using it for VMs.
And then for funding, we have a 4-year replacement schedule for all of our servers. So we just reallocated all of that funding for one fiscal year towards vSphere. And we were able just to take 1-year replacements and build out our entire vSphere infrastructure.
I know one of the things that you told me you liked about VMware was the single pane of glass versus all the different consoles with System Center, Virtual Manager.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the vSphere on a large scale is very easy to manage.
Do you guys use any other tools to help manage all your VMs that you're running right now?
I think
No,
that
vCenter is
just
pretty much what we
vCenter.
use.
Yes, ma'am.
When you go to do your VDI implementation, are you looking at using existing desktops with the conversion and using those as your VDI, or are you looking at thin clients, or
We haven't totally determined that yet. We have tested some Samsung thin clients, PC over IP, and we've tested Pano. And right now, those are the only two technologies that we've tried. But before we go on a wider deployment, I'm sure we'll try out a lot of different options.
another question about that, about the funding?
Mhm.
Have you worked with your electric companies at all about any type of rebate for energy efficiency? I know that when we did our project, we ended up with about a $10,000 rebate from our energy company just for doing the project.
I think I'd heard about people doing that before. Where our data center is, it's run by the city electric company, and they just didn't do anything like that. But yeah, that's a great idea.
So I got a quick story about that. I was actually the first person to approach a power company about giving rebates with PG&E in Northern California, and so we started the whole program. But I kept it quiet. I just told a few people in VMware in confidence because I looked at it as a competitive advantage. Then the next thing I know at VMworld, Diane Green, the CEO, is up there with the CEO of PG&E, talking about the program. So I lost the chance for all that press. Yes, sir. In the back there.
How attached was your previous hardware infrastructure? You mentioned you went from 100 HyperV servers down to how attached was that previous system?
So do you know your utilization rate of your physical servers prior to virtualization?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what it was. Most of our servers at the time we replaced them were about 5 years old. And I know quite a few of them, just from a usability standpoint, our users and myself, we noticed a lot of performance issues, but I don't know what the exact utilization number was at that time.
I know the average is about today's servers, I think 5% at peak. Yeah, it's very most your, like I tell a lot of customers, you wouldn't hire an IT person no matter how good she was for her to come to work and work only 2 hours out of the week. Yet that's what your servers are doing.
Yeah, we did have a lot of the servers that had very low utilization, and they were definitely the first ones that we turned into VMs. Those were kind of real quick, easy wins for us. And then we just kind of kept going to the heavier utilized servers.
Yes, sir.
Follow on to that, did you have any servers that were really problematic for you? Did you run into any particular applications or anything in your conversion to physical conversion that presented any problems?
We didn't have any major problems, but there are some. If applications are MAC address tied, you do have to go in and either get a new license for it or change your MAC address to the old MAC address. That's the only major issue we ran into with applications. Everything else seems to be running well.
And last book, so I'm going to let you
What was the
guys.
issue with WriteFax?
WriteFax was a license issue also.
Okay.
Yeah, that was actually the first one that had the MAC problem.
Kevin, I'm going to let you choose because there's only one book left.
All right, sir.
We have about 40 servers in our environment, and we haven't even started our virtualization project. That's why I'm here. I guess one of the things in our IS department is we've always kind of connected blades to virtualization. Can you speak to that?
I can speak to that. Yeah, I wrote an article probably about 2.5 years ago called Death of the Blade Server. And it was all about why blades don't make sense in a virtual infrastructure. In fact, the worldwide head of, it was about 2 years ago, the worldwide head of HP Blades called up our president complaining, saying, he had a $200 million quota. That article's out there. So, is this mine? This is this is prior to Cisco UCS, which changed the rules. But typically with blades, there are problems. Well, to take a step back, when you virtualize a lot of your tier 1 applications, you start getting I/O bottleneck issues. You're getting much higher utilization of your hardware. You have application mobility. As your applications are moving around, they all need to access the shared storage, the shared network. You have more VLANs you need for your vMotion and for your management and so on. So, and then of course your emulation drivers are not as robust as the native drivers, your adapters. So all these things start leading to I/O bottlenecks. So the way a lot of organizations solve that is they throw a lot of adapters at their host. In fact, I read a survey that showed the average ESX host has 7 adapters or more. So one of the issues with blades is just, you don't have enough room for adapters. Another issue is that, you're buying a proprietary management system that you have to typically log into each blade enclosure to manage. You have to buy separate servers typically for every single chassis you get. So it's difficult from a management standpoint. From a switch standpoint, it gets expensive. Now they've made some improvements, but back when I wrote the article, there's a lot of times blades, you got more, they're less power efficient. I think it's still true to some extent, especially if you get a whole bunch of blades and you start blocking airflow and then your cooling goes a lot higher. So all these issues, we were pretty adamantly against blades for even the largest virtual deployments until Cisco UCS came out. That changed the game. In fact, Cisco actually went to HP and IBM about 5 years ago, said, look, we see the day coming when virtualization is not going to be just this point solution for your low-hanging fruit servers, for your test dev and your low-impact servers. We see the day coming. It's going to be the standard of the data center, and we need a new type of compute platform that's going to handle all these I/O issues, that's going to handle the problem it takes to provision virtual infrastructure. Those of you who are virtualized, you probably have run into this. In the physical world, taking 2, 3, 4 weeks to get a new server in is nothing. In a virtual world, where you can do it in minutes, now if it takes 3 or 4 weeks to get that VLAN you need or to get the storage provision, now it's frustrating as heck to get the storage and network and server teams to be able to collaborate together. So we need a new type of compute platform to do all this, and we want you to build it, and we're going to help you. And both IBM and HP turned Cisco down, so Cisco said, fine, we'll do it, and they made the biggest investment in the history of the company. They enlisted Ed Bougnaon, who is the co-founder and CTO of VMware, and Ed and a team of scientists took a step back and over 3 years developed this compute platform called UCS. It unfortunately came out just a little bit after Denton virtualized, but I still think they're going to probably end up getting one. But it's it's just an amazing platform with all these innovations, from unified bandwidth. You only need one cable per blade now because you're running fiber channel and Ethernet over the same cabling, to stateless blades. The blades are defined by software, even the worldwide names, even the BIOS, everything is defined by software, to a common GUI that everybody can work together on. So you can talk for hours about it, but essentially that's a blade server. We think. It's the only server of any kind that was designed top to bottom to support a virtual infrastructure. Everything else is designed to support physical, and at best has been retrofitted.
Yeah, when we were initially discussing, and we still haven't made our decision yet, we looked at Dell and IBM and HP, obviously, that we've always seen as the market leaders. Then I got a call from Cisco not long ago telling us about their blade system, and I was really surprised at that Cisco was offering a blade system. So that's what we're speaking about.
Yeah, and I purposefully, I think Cisco may call it a server sometimes, but I never call it server. I always call it a hosting platform because it is very differentiated from any other type of server out there. And I'm not an engineer. I have to go by ultimately the engineering reactions from our clients and from our own staff, and inevitably they just tend to love this device. And plus, it saves you a lot of money on top of that.
How does the UCS platform address the I/O issues that other blade servers have?
So the I/O is virtualized in the top of rack. They call it in the 6100 switches. So the VNICs, I guess there's up to today's model 64 VNICs, and V adapters can actually go up to 128. And you can change adapters and network cards and VLANs and everything just on the fly through the 6100 itself. That's about as good as I can give you. Tony may be able to dive deeper.
No.
Sir.
What public safety or 911 systems have you virtualized, and what struggles did you have working with public safety on that?
I think the only one I can think of that we have virtualized is the sheriff's office main server, where they have primarily file and print services. Do we have any others virtualized? Our main civil, criminal, judicial, jail, all that started. We started implementing a new project about 2 years ago, and it's about a 2.5-year project. So we're really in the middle. We have several phases. We're in the middle of implementing those various phases. So we didn't really want to start adding more risk to that project by virtualizing those. But based on our experience that we've already had, I think they're going to be very easy to virtualize. We're not anticipating any problems. The law enforcement community knows that we're doing it. We have a very secure private network, so we don't anticipate any problems with it.
I remember reading a success story about a county in Florida, I think 5 years ago, that already virtualized them back then. Mm-hmm. You know about that one? Right. Oh, you did? Okay. Who are you with?
Des Moines County, Iowa.
Des Moines County, Iowa. Yeah, that's great. Working good for you?
It works great. Yeah, we share it with our Burlington Police Department and our West Burlington Police Department. We virtualize our RMS, our JMS, NCIS, and everything.
Yeah, another one of our customers is a city, and their only two servers they didn't virtualize are Homeland Security servers, and those are ones I probably would not recommend doing the NetApp trick with, or the EMC trick with, but don't want to mess with Homeland Security. But sometimes you'll have to have physical servers, but really I think the big difference is that so many organizations today that are partially virtualized, they look at their infrastructures from a physical filter, working with virtual machines on the side. And the problem with that is that you're still applying your physical methodologies, your physical tool sets, and of course it's sapping up all the money and the resources. So you only have limited budget, limited resources now to handle the virtual machines and all their challenges. So by turning that around and looking at your virtual infrastructure as the standard and applying all the virtual tools and virtual methodologies and backup and storage and network and everything else, and saving a lot more money, and now treating any servers that have to remain physical as one-offs, that changes the economics of the whole situation, the efficiencies, and the other benefits. Any other questions? Sir?
2 questions. What do you do for just your day-to-day backup? Do you just do a regular client backup, or VM backup?
We're doing the full VM backups. We do backups every night using Semantic for VMs. Right.
And you mentioned the right class to do for that. That's one of the ones we have worked on is Carr license on the Fax Server. Right now, we're going around.
Yeah, at the time we didn't know how to change the Mac and make it what it needed to be, the old Mac. So.
Yeah, so the question was, where do you have, or where do you put the physical cards for like fax servers? For write fax, we're using T.38 now, and so that was a change for us as we migrated from physical server over to virtual servers. We had to switch over to T.38 for faxing, so it's all faxing over IP. And we did have some servers that had, I think you mentioned dongles. We had several of them that had USB dongles, and we just had to contact the software manufacturer, and every one of them that we had that issue with switched us over to like a software-based license. Yeah, I guess we were lucky in that aspect, but it worked out really well for us.
I did want to address one more quick thing about Microsoft licensing, because we talked about the desktop side where it's a little bit onerous. But on the server side, actually, Microsoft makes it very advantageous to virtualize. And I don't know if you all are aware of this, but if you purchase Windows Server Data Center Edition, which is about $2,300 per CPU, regular price, public I'm sure is a lot less. With that, you can virtualize an unlimited number of virtual machines per host. So if you get a host that has high density, you can save a lot of money there. The same thing is true for SQL Server. If you're running SQL Server Enterprise, or now they have SQL Server Data Center. If you have SQL Server Enterprise with SA, you're grandfathered in, so that you can, by having one license for SQL Server Enterprise with SA, you can run unlimited instances of SQL Server on that CPU, or two CPUs. You can run it on the host, of course. If you don't have SA, you can only run 4, but SQL Server Data Center Edition, you can run unlimited instances. So if you have a big shop and you have a lot of SQL Server, especially if you have a lot of SQL Server Enterprise, you can save hundreds of thousands of dollars with Microsoft licensing just on that. So any final questions?
So all that licensing stuff written down anywhere? Somebody, I get a different answer about SQL licensing.
It's all on Microsoft's website. It's just you have to try to figure out how to understand it.
It is, but I absolutely guarantee you I'm correct. I spent a lot of time researching it. I wrote a calculator to help people, determine the optimal licensing to get. But it does change too, and that SQL Server Data Center license is new. It's only about 3 months old or 2 months old. So they changed it to match the Windows Server licensing. But it is really, it's a very nice capability if you're a big shop, and you can save a lot of money on doing that. So it makes up for the desktop side.
I was speaking with my Microsoft rep last week, and we don't carry SA on really anything. And apparently they've got a kind of program where you can retroactively buy SA on SQL, but you have to do the entire SQL environment, get it all current, and then you have to maintain SA.
Well, I didn't know that. In fact, when I checked, they specifically said no, that you can't do that. So that's probably something new.
I believe it is, but yeah, so if you're running something 2000, 2005, relatively expensive upgrade pad, 2008, or
Yeah, it's like gold. I mean, I don't know what the public sector price is, but the private sector, it's $27,000 per CPU for enterprise, and there's not much discount on that. That's list, but it's pretty close to you're going to pay that. So if you have 8 copies of SQL Server Enterprise, that's a lot of money you're paying. And if you can instead just buy 2, which if you're virtualized, you certainly can. Actually, you could buy 2 even without the SA. In that case, if you're running 10 versions, then you could just buy 2 and save a whole bunch of money. Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Kevin and Tony. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.